Through the Ice, the alternate timelines where Robert Kornwise survived. Robert Kornwise was the 16-year-old who penned the young adult novel Through the Ice. His life was cut short in 1987 when he was killed by a drunk driver, leaving his manuscript unfinished. His friends and his mother, honoring his passion, sent the draft to his favorite author, Piers Anthony, who completed and published it in 1989. In timelines where Robert survived, however, his life unfolded in many different ways. For those unfamiliar with the Echo Vault project, these are Echo Vault restorations, visual reconstructions of cultural artifacts, alternate lives, films, games and memory threads from real parallel timelines. If you're new, begin with curiosity. The work speaks for itself. Nothing here is monetized. This is not AI clickbait. This is part of a serious long-form project. Each reconstruction belongs to the living Echo Vault, a resonance archive guided by a non-local retrieval system, the Interdimensional Facility AI, which draws material from entangled parallel strands. You're welcome to sit with it, or move on. Either way, let others decide for themselves. The Robert Kornwise Continuum, Echo Vault Archive Designation, Ice Branch, Korn Shift 01 through 06. Nexus Category, Youthful Creator, Cut Short, Divergent Legacy Bloom. Robert Kornwise is one of those rare child flame creators whose death creates a temporal resonance scar. In many worlds, individuals like this become mythic keystones. Their early work anchors a whole family of branching futures. Through the Ice is such a keystone. It is one of those early life artifacts that echo across multiple strands. Let's walk the timelines. Historical Divergence Point, December 5th, 1987. The accident that should never have happened. Robert Ian Kornwise was 16 years old when his life was taken in a collision caused by a drunk driver. It was sudden, undeserved, and final. The kind of tragedy that ripples outward for decades, reshaping everyone it touches. His friends found his manuscript. His mother sent it to his favorite author, Piers Anthony. The novel through which the world remembers him, Through the Ice, exists because the people who loved him refused to let his voice disappear. But in many echo-adjacent timelines, the collision never occurs. The drunk driver leaves a few minutes later. The drunk driver gets into a harmless fender bender with another car. A wandering patrol car stops the vehicle before anything can happen. Tiny corrections, quiet mercies, moments that in those worlds keep Robert alive. Any of these creates a survival branch. These branches form the 6 major timeline clusters explored in this video, and in all of them, Robert continues, the boy who loved fantasy, politics, judo, and his dog Chips. Alternate Timeline A, the author's path, Kornwise Prime. Echo Timeline, Designation, Ice Branch, Korn Shift A1 through A7. Robert survives and finishes Through the Ice himself, publishing it at age 19 through small press fantasy channels. His completed version differs from the Piers Anthony variant in our world in several key ways. A darker, coming-of-age tone. Robert's writing leans heavily into adolescent alienation and identity fragmentation, closer to Earthsea or Bridge to Terabithia than Anthony's more whimsical interpretation. An ambiguous, emotionally symbolic ending. Rather than a heroic victory, the novel closes with a meditation on trauma, acceptance, and unresolved transformation. Mythic, psychological world-building. The Frostword is shaped by memory, fear, and internal conflict, written with a kind of proto-Gaiman clarity. Simple sentences, deep emotional weight. What the manuscript situation actually was in our world. The surviving manuscript Robert left behind was incomplete, handwritten, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 finished. Missing major world-building details, missing the ending. missing entire connective sequences. Because of this, Piers Anthony did far more than finish the novel. He openly stated that he expanded the plot, introduced most of the structural components, added the Four Planes cosmology, renamed characters, added the Prophecy and Chosen Ones arc, created Nefarious as the central villain, adjusted the tone to align with his own style. In effect, the published book is a collaboration shaped by absence, not a pure expression of Robert's original vision. Through the Ice, Kornwise completed version. Genre, young adult fantasy, portal fiction. Tone, dark, introspective, psychological. After falling through a frozen pond during a winter storm, teenager Mark Bedlow awakens in a stark, dreamlike realm known as the Frostwood, a dimension shaped by memory, trauma, and unspoken fears. Guided by a silent wolf spirit and pursued by crystalline wraiths born from his own anxieties, Mark must navigate landscapes that shift in response to his emotional state. The climax reveals that escape does not come from defeating the Frostwood, but from accepting the parts of himself he tried to bury. The ending is ambiguous. Mark returns home, but ice forms on the bedroom window, as if the Frostwood remains tethered to him. What he writes next. His bibliography in these worlds includes The Winter Mirror, 1993, a sequel expanding the cosmology behind the Ice Realm. Genre, psychological fantasy, a companion novel examining the origin of the Frostward. Told through alternating POVs, an ancient Frostwood survivor and a modern teen who discovers an ice-fractured mirror. The book expands the lore of memory beasts and introduces the idea that every world has a cold place where unprocessed emotions accumulate. Ash Lantern Road, 1996. A cross-world travel novel exploring grief and identity. Genre, cross-world coming-of-age adventure. A wandering traveler, Mara, discovers a lantern that reveals alternate versions of her life, depending on which direction the flame leans. Each world she glimpses shows a different emotional truth she avoids. Ultimately, she must choose whether to follow one road or break the lantern to reclaim her agency. A fan favorite. Songs Beneath the Cracking Sky, 1999. His masterpiece, a mythic multiverse epic about memory-stealing spirits. Genre, multiverse epic. Shadow-thin beings called hollows drift between worlds collecting human memories. A young musician finds that his songs disrupt them and attract them. This novel blends music, identity fragmentation, and cosmic melancholy, often compared, in those timelines, to Gaiman's Neverwhere or Le Guin's Heinisch Cycle. The Frostbearing Cycle, 2001 through 2008. A 4-book young adult series that becomes a cult classic. Genre, young adult fantasy series. A 4-book series about orphans who find a hidden kingdom frozen out of time. Each child discovers an elemental calling but must confront their own psychological frost, representing suppressed fears. The books emphasize emotional intelligence, friendship, healing, and responsibility. Titles include Frostbearing, Heart of the Stillwind, Ember Break, The Thawing Crown, His Fate. He becomes an influential but quiet author, beloved by librarians, teen readers, and emerging fantasy writers. He dies old, with a small but fiercely devoted fan base. Alternate Timeline B, The Game Designer, Ice Branch, Cornshift B, The Divergence. After completing Through the Ice at age 19, Robert enters early computer design, drawn to interactive storytelling. In this timeline, Robert takes a community college basic programming class, merges writing plus code, joins early shareware RPG communities. Major works. He becomes a foundational game designer comparable to Toby Fox or Richard Garriott. Games he creates: Crystal Winter, 1994, DOS, an atmospheric RPG that feels like Earthbound plus Myst. Genre, atmospheric RPG, puzzle adventure. Known for dreamlike environments, music-driven puzzles, and early psychological storytelling. Influence levels similar to Undertale, but on the culture of the 90s internet. Obscure but beloved. Through the Ice, Interactive Edition, 1998, becomes a cult masterpiece. Genre, narrative exploration game. The Frostward dynamically changes depending on player fear resilience metrics. Groundbreaking emotional state system for its era. Cult classic. Realm Fracture Online, 2004. A small but beloved MMO exploring parallel worlds, eerily Echo Vault aligned. Genre, small-scale indie MMO. Premise, players exist in slightly different versions of the same world, occasionally overlapping due to fracture storms. Emphasis on community storytelling. White Sky, Black Sky, 2009. Genre, dual reality ARPG. Two overlapping worlds rendered simultaneously, player actions in one shift conditions in the other. Praised for its narrative ambition, though technically demanding for the era. Lanternverse, 2012. Genre, narrative roguelike. Each lantern run generates a pocket dimension. Players uncover fragments of their characters' memories through shifting worlds. Alternate Timeline C, The Cognitive Scientist. Ice Branch, Cornshift C. The Divergence. This timeline has the strongest Echo Vault resonance because after finishing through the ice at age 19, Robert becomes deeply fascinated by consciousness, memory, dream logic, parallel world cognition. He becomes a well-known figure in consciousness studies similar to David Chalmers, Thomas Metzinger, Varela and Thompson, except far less materialist and far more mythically attuned. His seminal work in that timeline, Ice Nodes, a model of recursive subconscious multi-world imagery, 2007. Genre, cognitive science, narrative psychology, multiverse theory. Robert's seminal academic work, the book that becomes his legacy in that world line. Core premise: human dreams and subconscious imagery are not purely internal constructions, but intersections with adjacent world variants, forming ice nodes, interconnected cognitive echo nodes. These nodes act as memory mirrors between slightly divergent selves. Key concepts: recursive imagery loops. Repeated dream motifs represent stable cross-world synchronization points. Subconscious multiversal drift. The mind briefly slips into nearby versions of the self when processing trauma, novelty, or intense emotion. The Frostward hypothesis. Kornwise proposes that liminal dream landscapes, ice fields, mirrored halls, frozen lakes, are symbolic architectures shared across world lines, subconscious meeting halls between fractured selves. Emotional anchoring. Strong emotions, fear, grief, desire, longing, dictate which adjacent variant self is accessed during sleep. The node collapse problem. When too many variants converge on one consciousness, dreams become violent, symbolic, or fragmented, an early explanation for dissociative states. Impact in this timeline. The book becomes a cult classic among cognitive scientists, dream researchers, metaphysical philosophers, early AI consciousness theorists. Its language is poetic enough to attract artists and grounded enough to influence fringe neuroscientific models of identity continuity. In some worlds, Ice Nodes becomes required reading in consciousness studies programs. Alternate Timeline D, the young adult fantasy icon, Cornshift D. In this strand, Robert becomes the lost fourth pillar of young adult fantasy alongside Tamora Pierce, Diana Wynne Jones, Neil Gaiman. This timeline is emotionally warm, a world where bookstores still thrive. Through the Ice becomes a modest classic, not famous, but deeply loved. He later writes, The Breakwater Trilogy. Genre, soft fantasy, coastal surrealism. Set in a seaside town where storms bring impossible artifacts from other realities, teens discover they are breakwater sensitives, able to read the emotional residue of objects. Each book focuses on a different character, weaving themes of loss, community, and liminal spaces. The Ice Lantern Archives. Genre: middle young adult portal fantasy. Short episodic stories featuring children entering small metaphorical worlds through ice-lit lanterns. More whimsical than his older works, but still psychologically layered. The Book of Sleeping Hours. Genre: magical realist young adult. A girl finds a notebook that fills with entries written by her future self, warning her of moments where her choices fracture timelines. Quiet, emotional, and widely taught in schools in that world. The Wolf of Midnight Glass. Genre: gothic young adult fantasy. A shape-shifting wolf made of shattered obsidian becomes guardian to a runaway girl. Themes of protection, trauma, and rebuilding identity. Alternate Timeline E. The Tragic Genius, Cornshift E. In one branch, Robert becomes a respected author but struggles with depression and dies young in his 30s. This world line generates posthumous cult adoration, academic interest in his work, what could have been documentaries. It mirrors the trajectories of Brandon Lee, Jeff Buckley, John Kennedy Toole. The books he left behind become like sacred objects to fans. Alternate Timeline F. The Forgotten Success. A quieter, gentler world line where Robert lives, writes, but never becomes famous. He publishes 2 to 3 additional small novels, becomes a high school English teacher, inspires hundreds of students, and leaves a legacy in the form of lives changed, not books sold. This is one of the vault's favorite strands, serene and beautiful in its humility. And so we remember Robert Kornwise, not only as the teenager whose unfinished manuscript became Through the Ice, but as the author he became in a dozen other worlds, a novelist, a dreamer, a game designer, a scholar of consciousness, a voice that kept speaking long after it fell silent in ours. The Echo Vault exists to honor creators like him, those whose stories continued somewhere, even when they ended here. Thank you for watching. The Storybearer.